Michael took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. He had to finish what he had started, even if it meant giving up everything. The house had consumed so many lives, twisted so many destinies. It was time for the cycle to end. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the leather-bound book he had found in the library, the book that held the key to the Turner family's dark past, the book that had revealed the terrible truth about the house. His fingers shook as he flipped through the pages, stopping when he reached the final passage. It was the ritual that would break the curse, but at a terrible cost. Michael knew what he had to do. He had to make the sacrifice, to offer his blood to the house, to end the torment for good. As he read the words aloud, the air around him seemed to change. The house groaned, its timbers creaking, as though it were alive, responding to his words. The shadows in the room thickened, swirling around him, pulling him deeper into the darkness. Michael could feel the house closing in on him, its cold fingers brushing against his skin. The floor beneath him seemed to shift, as though it were opening up, preparing to swallow him whole. But he didn't flinch. He didn't pull away. He was ready. With a final breath, he knelt before the desk, his hand resting on the carved symbols. As he did, the room seemed to tremble, the walls shaking with the force of the house's reaction. The air crackled with energy, and Michael felt a surge of power flow through him, stronger than anything he had ever experienced. But as the power built, something else began to emerge, something darker, something malevolent. The room seemed to shift, the walls closing in on him, the shadows now alive with twisted shapes. Michael's heart raced, and for the first time, fear gripped him. Was this the house's final act of vengeance? Was it going to claim him, as it had claimed so many before him? But Michael didn't back down. He knew what he had to do. He had to see this through, no matter the cost. His breath quickened, his chest tightening. As the shadows closed in, his mind raced, thoughts swirling like a storm. The house was fighting back, resisting the ritual, but Michael wouldn't give in. He was the key, the last of the Turner bloodline. It had to end with him. He raised his hand to the carved symbols, pressing his palm against the wall. As he did, the room seemed to pulse with energy, the shadows writhing and twisting around him. The air became thick with the smell of decay, the walls vibrating with the power of the ritual. And then, just as he thought he could take no more, the house went still. The shadows receded, the walls stopped shaking, and the room fell silent. Michael opened his eyes, his chest heaving with exertion. He had done it. The curse was broken. The house had been defeated. But as he looked around, he realized that something had changed. The house was no longer just a place. It had become a memory, a part of his past, a dark chapter that he had closed forever. The Turner family's bloodline was no more. Michael stood up, feeling the weight of the house's history lift from his shoulders. He had won. The curse was broken, and now there was only silence. Michael couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Even though the house had gone quiet, there was something in the air, something unsettling that lingered just beyond his reach. As he moved through the now empty room, the oppressive silence felt heavier than before, as if the house was still trying to hold on to its secrets. He turned to leave, but something caught his eye. A small, ornate mirror hanging on the wall just beside the door. He hadn't noticed it before. The glass was covered in dust, and the frame was carved with intricate patterns, old and weathered, yet still beautiful. There was something about it that seemed out of place, as though it didn't belong in the room, like it had been placed there for a reason. Unable to resist, Michael stepped closer, wiping away the dust from the surface of the mirror. His reflection stared back at him, but something was wrong. His face looked different. distorted somehow, as though the reflection was not entirely his own. His heart began to race, and the hairs on the back of his neck stood up. He took a step back, but his reflection didn't follow. It lingered in the mirror, as though trapped there, unable to escape. Suddenly, the room felt colder, the air thick with a presence that Michael couldn't quite identify. He glanced around, expecting to see something, anything, but the room remained still, untouched, yet the mirror seemed to pull him in, drawing his gaze like a magnet. His reflection, still distorted, began to move on its own. With each passing second, the reflection grew more erratic. Michael could hear his own breath quickening, but the reflection didn't mirror him. Instead, it twisted and contorted, as though it were trying to break free from the confines of the glass. It was no longer his face staring back at him, but something else, something dark, something hungry. He wanted to look away, but he couldn't. His feet were frozen in place. The air grew heavier, and the shadows in the room deepened, creeping along the floor like dark tendrils. The room itself seemed to pulse with an energy that Michael couldn't comprehend, as if the house was alive, feeding off his fear. The reflection in the mirror began to laugh, a hollow, chilling sound that seemed to echo in the room, reverberating off the walls. Michael felt his chest tighten, his heart hammering in his chest. As the laughter grew louder, more maniacal, he wanted to scream, to run, but his body wouldn't obey. He was paralyzed, caught in the grip of something far more powerful than he could have ever imagined. Suddenly, the reflection stopped laughing. The room fell silent again, but the air was thick with dread. Michael felt a chill run down his spine as he stared into the mirror. His reflection was now still staring back at him, with eyes that were empty, hollow, and cold. It was as though whatever had once been trapped inside the mirror had finally found a way to break free. Then, without warning, the mirror began to crack, the glass splitting down the middle in a jagged line. The sound was deafening, like the breaking of butter. Michael's heart skipped a beat as he took a step back, his mind racing. The house was trying to tell him something he wasn't ready to understand. The cracks in the mirror spread like wildfire, until the entire surface was shattered, the pieces falling to the floor with a deafening crash. But even as the glass shattered, the reflection remained. It didn't disappear. Instead, it pressed itself against the broken shards, its twisted smile widening, as if it had finally found freedom. Michael stumbled backward, his legs weak, his mind reeling. He had broken the curse. He had ended the ritual, but it seemed that the house wasn't done with him yet. The reflection in the mirror had become something else, something that had been waiting, trapped for so long. It had fed on his fear, and now it was free. With one last glance at the broken mirror, Michael turned and fled the room. He didn't look back. The house had claimed enough of his soul, and he wasn't about to let it take any more. The door slammed behind him with a deafening bang, and he ran through the halls, the sound of his footsteps echoing through the empty house. The walls seemed to close in on him, the shadows growing longer with every passing second. He had to get out. He had to escape before it was too late. But as he reached the front door, the house seemed to change. The air grew thick, suffocating, as if the walls themselves were pushing against him, trying to keep him inside. The door wouldn't open. He pulled at the handle, but it was stuck, locked. He pounded on the wood, shouting, but the house didn't respond. The laughter from the mirror echoed in his ears, filling his head with madness. Michael's mind raced. He had to find a way out. He had to break free. But the house was alive, and it wouldn't let him go. The walls seemed to close in on him, the shadows stretching, like claws reaching for him, pulling him deeper into the heart of the house. And then, just as suddenly as it had all begun, the house went still. The door creaked open, and Michael stepped out into the cold night air,
gasping for breath. He looked back at the house, its dark silhouette looming behind him. The laughter still echoed in his mind, and he could feel the house watching him, waiting for him to make a mistake. But Michael had escaped. For now, the curse had been broken. But the house would always remain. As Michael stood outside, the door creaked open behind him. Though he hadn't touched, the darkness of the Turner house seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction, and he felt its presence, cold and suffocating, just beyond the threshold. His body shook, exhaustion creeping in, but his mind screamed for him to run, to never look back. But something deep within kept him frozen in place. The house, it seemed, had finally given up its hold on him, but there was an undeniable pull, a lure in the air, drawing him back toward the place he had just escaped. He had done it. He had broken the curse. The door had opened, and he was free. But as his feet remained planted firmly on the dirt path in front of the house, a chilling thought crossed his mind. What if the curse hadn't been broken at all? His breath caught in his throat. The house could never let go of its secrets. That much was clear. Michael had heard the stories, the rumors about the Turner family, about their twisted rituals and their dark history, but he never imagined that what he had just witnessed would stay with him forever. The cracked mirror, the laughter, the reflection, none of it had been real in the way he'd understood. There was something deeper, something ancient, at play here, and no matter how far he ran, no matter how many years passed, the house would always be there waiting. As the wind howled through the trees, Michael glanced back once more, his heart racing in his chest. The house was silent now, but its shadows lingered, stretching long across the yard like fingers reaching for him. He had broken the curse, but had he? A cold sweat ran down his spine as he heard a faint whisper on the wind, a voice just out of reach. His mind refused to believe what he was hearing. But the voice sounded like a woman's. She was calling him. He spun around, his feet stumbling as he fought to keep his balance. The door was open wider now, just a crack more than before. The faintest sliver of light leaked out from within, casting a long shadow across the porch. He knew what that meant. He had to leave, right then and there. But his feet betrayed him. His legs moved on their own, pulling him back toward the house, toward the door. The whisper grew louder, a faint murmur at first, then clearer. "You can't escape. You never did." His chest tightened as the realization hit him. The Turner house, with its broken glass, its cracked mirror, its twisted reflection, it was still alive. Not in the way a person is alive, but alive in a different, darker sense. It fed on the fear of those who entered, growing stronger each time it took someone's soul. Michael had escaped, but his fear, his memory of what happened, was the last piece it needed to complete its curse. It hadn't been lifted at all. It had only evolved. He took a step back, his eyes wide as panic set in. But it was too late. The door slammed shut with a violent force, and the ground beneath his feet seemed to rumble. The house was alive. The house was watching him. Suddenly a deep, resonating voice came from within, echoing from the very walls of the house. It was not the woman's voice anymore. It was deeper, more sinister, like the house itself was speaking. "You should have stayed away." The air turned cold. Michael's skin prickled, his breath shallow as the darkness enveloped him. The once familiar path in front of him faded into blackness, and the ground beneath his feet felt soft, like it was sinking away. The Turner house was pulling him in, just as it had done with all the others. But this time it wasn't just the house that had him in its grip. It was the very memories of what had happened, the reflection, the laughter, the fear that were clawing at his mind. The house had left an imprint on him, one that would never fade, one that would haunt him forever. And then, as quickly as it had started, the feeling the ground solidified beneath his feet, the air grew still, and the house once again stood silent in front of him. The door was closed, but now it felt different. The house wasn't trying to pull him in anymore. It had already won. It had taken something from him. Something he couldn't describe. Something that would never be returned. Michael stood still, caught in the empty yard, unable to move. The laughter from inside the house was gone, but its memory lingered, creeping into every corner of his mind. The reflection in the broken mirror was still with him, staring back at him with hollow eyes. His breath came in shallow gasps as the terror that had once been so real, returned to suffocate. For a moment, he thought he heard the faintest sound, like footsteps coming from the house. But when he turned around, the door was still shut. The Turner house was empty. The Turner house was waiting. The curse had not ended. It had only shifted, transformed, and it was still very much alive. Michael could feel it, deep inside him, clawing at his soul, pulling him back, urging him to open the door one last time. But Michael knew that if he did, if he opened the door again, he would never leave. The house would have him for good.
If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more mysteries that will keep you on the edge of your seat.
But as the darkness closed in, Michael reached out for the book one last time, determined to uncover the final secret that had bound his family to this cursed place. He opened the book again, the pages turning by themselves as the words began to speak to him. This time, he understood them. "You are the key," the book whispered, and as the room plunged into darkness, Michael realized it was too late to escape. The Turner curse had finally come full circle. The darkness closed in, thick and suffocating, like a blanket that wrapped around Michael, pulling him into the depths of the unknown. The air was stifling, filled with the scent of decay, ancient dust, and something else, something metallic and rancid. The whispering voices had stopped, replaced by an eerie silence that felt almost suffocating. Michael's mind raced, unable to comprehend the sheer weight of the situation. He had opened the door, stepped into the cursed heart of the house, and now it was too late. The words from the book echoed in his mind, over and over. "You are the key." He had heard them clearly, understood them in his soul. The Turner curse wasn't just a family secret or a tragic fate. He was part of it. His bloodline, his very existence, was tied to the house in ways he could never have imagined. His hand trembled as he reached for the book once again. But as he did, the room seemed to shift. The walls seemed to ripple, the ground beneath his feet warping, as though reality itself was bending. The ancient symbols carved into the walls began to glow with an unnatural light, casting an eerie pallor over everything. The whispers returned, louder than ever, now a chorus of voices that seemed to come from the very walls, the floor, the air itself. "You are the key," they repeated, over and over, each voice distinct, yet unified in its message. Suddenly, a shadow moved across the room, drawing Michael's attention. His heart skipped a beat as he turned toward it, only to find that it was no shadow at all, but something far worse. A figure, dark and distorted, stepped from the corner of the room, its form shrouded in darkness. Its eyes gleamed with an otherworldly light, and its presence radiated pure malevolence. It was like nothing he had ever seen before, a twisted, ghostly figure, a specter that seemed to have come from the very fabric of the house itself. The figure moved toward him, its steps silent, as though it was gliding across the floor. Michael tried to back away, but his legs wouldn't move. His body was frozen in place, as if held by an invisible force. His heart hammered in his chest, panic rising in his throat as he tried to comprehend what was happening. "You should not have come," the figure whispered in a voice that was both distant and close, as though it was speaking directly into his mind. "The house does not forgive." Michael tried to speak, but no words came out. His throat was dry, constricted. He felt the weight of the curse pressing down on him,
suffocating him, trapping him in this place. The figure's eyes glowed brighter, burning with an intensity that pierced through the darkness. "You have opened the door," the figure continued, its voice now a hiss. "Now you must face the consequences." Michael's pulse raced as the air around him grew colder, the temperature plummeting as though the room itself was freezing. His breath came out in sharp, visible gasps, and he could feel the weight of the house bearing down on him. It was alive, aware, and it had chosen him. He felt a hand. No, not a hand. An unseen force grip his wrist. The pain was sharp, searing, as though the very air was burning. The figure's presence grew stronger, closer, and Michael could no longer tell where his body ended, and the darkness began. The house, the curse, it was all around him, suffocating him, pulling him into its depths. The figure's voice echoed in his mind, a twisted version of his own thought. "You will never leave," it whispered. "Your bloodline has been bound to this house for generations. You are part of it now, part of its eternal hunger." Michael struggled, his will to escape fighting against the overwhelming pull of the curse. He tried to scream, to call for help, but the words caught in his throat. The weight of the house, the weight of his ancestors' sins, crushed him. It was all too much. The curse had been building for centuries, feeding on each generation, and now it had claimed him. The figure reached out with its distorted hand, its long, skeletal fingers brushing Michael's cheek. The touch was ice cold, sending a shock of fear through him. He closed his eyes, bracing for the worst, but nothing happened. For a moment, everything was still. Then, the figure stepped back, its form dissipating into the darkness. The room fell silent, save for Michael's ragged breathing. He looked around, confused, disoriented. The book was gone, the altar empty. The symbols on the walls had faded, leaving nothing but the bare, cold stone. The house was silent, as though nothing had ever happened. But Michael knew better. He could feel it. The curse had not left. It was still there, waiting. He looked down at his hands, the same hands that had opened the door, that had taken the key. He could feel the bloodline calling to him, the weight of the curse, the promise of eternal suffering. The house had chosen him, and there was no escape. But deep inside, Michael knew the truth. He wasn't the first to fall victim to the curse, and he wouldn't be the last. The Turner house would continue to claim those who dared to enter, to uncover its secrets. It was bound to the bloodline, bound to the house, and it would never let go. With one final glance at the empty chamber, Michael turned and walked toward the stair. The house had chosen him, but he would not let it claim him. Not yet. There was still time, still a chance to break free. But as he climbed the stairs, he could feel the curse following him, lingering at the edges of his mind. And he knew deep down that no matter how far he ran, the Turner house would always find a way to bring him back. Michael's footsteps echoed through the silent halls of the Turner house, each step heavier than the last. The weight of the curse pressed on him like a physical force, as though the very air around him had thickened. His heart pounded in his chest, and every breath felt labored. The house seemed to have become an extension of his mind, its darkness creeping into his thoughts, clouding his judgment, suffocating him with its presence. As he moved further from the locked door, the oppressive silence of the house took over, swallowing him whole. He passed through the grand hallway, the paintings of long-dead ancestors hanging on the walls, their eyes seemingly watching him, judging him. Their expressions were distorted, their faces frozen in eternal disapproval, as though they knew what he had done. He reached the library, where the air smelled of old books, dust, and forgotten memories. The dim lighting cast shadows across the room, and Michael's eyes flicked nervously to the corners, expecting to see something lurking in the darkness. His mind raced with questions. What had he unleashed? Was there a way to stop it? Was it already too late? His thoughts were interrupted by a creaking noise, A soft, almost imperceptible sound. Michael froze. His breath caught in his throat. He strained his ears, listening for any sign of movement. The house seemed to hold its breath, as though it too was waiting for something. Suddenly, the noise came again, louder this time. It was the sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from the floor above. Michael's pulse quickened. He wasn't alone. He could feel it. Something, or someone, was following him. His heart skipped a beat. The figure from the locked room, the voice that had whispered to him, "You are the key," flashed through his mind. He had to get out of there. He had to leave before the house consumed him. But as he turned toward the door, his body stiffened. A figure stood at the entrance, blocking his path. It was a man dressed in old, tattered clothes, his face pale and gaunt. His eyes were hollow, empty, like two black voids, staring into Michael's soul. "You shouldn't have come," the man whispered, his voice soft, but full of malice. "The house never forgets." Michael took a step back, his instincts screaming at him to run. But his feet wouldn't move. He was paralyzed by fear, unable to tear his gaze away from the man. There was something familiar about him, something that tugged at the edges of his memory, but he couldn't place it. The man stepped forward, his footsteps silent on the wooden floor. Michael's breath caught in his throat as the man reached out with a trembling hand. The air grew colder, and the shadows in the room deepened, swirling around them like a storm. The man's hand was ice cold when it touched Michael's arm, sending a shock of dread through his entire body. "You can't escape," the man whispered, his voice full of regret. "No one ever does." The man's face twisted in pain, his eyes flashing with something almost like sorrow. Before the darkness seemed to consume him, Michael stumbled backward, his heart racing as the man disappeared into the shadows, leaving nothing but the cold air in his wake. For a moment, Michael stood frozen, the terror of the encounter gripping him. He tried to speak, to scream, but no sound escaped his lips. The house had him now, and he knew it. He couldn't escape. No one ever could. But there was a flicker of hope buried deep inside him. He remembered the books in the library, the ones that spoke of the Turner family's curse. There had to be something, some clue, some way to break free. He couldn't just give up, not yet. With renewed determination, Michael rushed to the library, his footsteps quick and urgent. His mind was focused on the knowledge he might find there, the answers hidden within the dusty pages of forgotten books. He scanned the shelves, his fingers brushing over the spines of ancient tomes, until he found what he was looking for. It was a small, leather-bound book, its pages yellowed with age. The title was worn, nearly illegible, but Michael could make out the word curse. His heart raced as he opened the book, the musty scent of old paper filling his nostril. He flipped through the pages, his eyes scanning the text, desperate for any clue that might help him break the curse. As he read, his eyes widened. The book detailed the Turner family's dark history, the rituals, the blood sacrifices, the pact they had made with the house. It was more than just a curse. It was a binding, a contract that tied the Turner bloodline to the house itself. Each generation was cursed to live in the house, to serve its twisted desires, until the bloodline was erased. But then, there it was, a single passage that seemed to offer a way out. It was a ritual, a way to break the curse, but it required something far greater than Michael could have ever anticipated. The ritual needed a blood sacrifice, but not just any sacrifice. A Turner descendant, someone who carried the family's bloodline, would need to offer their life to the house, to end the curse, once and for all. Michael felt a cold chill run down his spine as he realized the implication. He was the last of the Turner family. He was the one who had to make the sacrifice. The thought terrified him, but he knew there was no other choice. The house would not let him go until the curse was broken. With trembling hands, Michael closed the book. His decision made. He couldn't let the Turner bloodline continue this cycle of horror. and despair. He would do what was necessary to end it, even if it meant sacrificing himself. As he made his way toward the heart of the house, toward the locked door that had started it all, he felt the weight of the curse bearing down on him, pressing him into the darkness. He knew the house was watching, waiting, but this time, he would not be its victim. This time, he would take control. The house had claimed so many before him, but Michael Turner was going to make sure it didn't claim anyone else. Michael stood before the locked door, his heart pounding in his chest, the weight of his decision pressing down on him. With each passing second, the house felt alive, as though it was watching him, anticipating his every move. The air grew colder the closer he got, and the shadows around him deepened, stretching and twisting like they were trying to pull him into the darkness. He reached out and grasped the cold, rusted doorknob. It felt strange, as if the house itself were pushing back against him, reluctant to let go of its secrets. But Michael was resolute. He had come this far, and he wasn't going to turn back now. With a deep breath, he twisted the knob. The door creaked open slowly, the sound echoing through the silence of the house. Michael's pulse quickened as the door swung wide, revealing the room beyond. The room was exactly as he remembered it, dimly lit, the walls lined with shelves of old dusty books. The same heavy, musty smell lingered in the air, and the floor creaked underfoot, as if it had aged with time. But there was something different this time. Something felt off, like the room itself was holding its breath, waiting for him to make the next move. He stepped inside cautiously, his eyes scanning the room for any sign of movement, but there was nothing. The silence was deafening, almost suffocating. It was as if the house had gone still, waiting for him to unlock the final piece of the puzzle. As Michael moved deeper into the room, his eyes landed on the old worn desk in the corner, the same desk he had seen so many years ago, the one with the strange symbols carved into the wood. It was still there, but this time, the carvings were clearer, more distant, as if they had been waiting for him to decipher their meaning. He walked over to the desk, his hand trembling as he reached out to touch the carvings. The moment his fingers made contact with the wood, a strange energy pulsed through him, and he recoiled, his breath catching in his throat. It was as though the house had given him a warning, but Michael couldn't stop himself now. He leaned closer to examine the carvings, running his fingers over the intricate symbols. There was something familiar about them, something that tugged at his memory, but he couldn't place it. The symbols seemed to be a language of their own, a language that had been lost to time, and yet, as he touched them, he felt a surge of understanding wash over him. These symbols were part of the ritual that would either break the curse or condemn him to a fate worse than death.
With trembling hands, Michael turned away from the door, his eyes searching the dark corners of the room. There was something he needed to understand. There was something he had missed. The house, the key, the letter, it all pointed to something far more sinister than he had realized. He turned down a hallway he hadn't noticed before, a narrow corridor that seemed to stretch endlessly into the distance. It was a part of the house he had never seen, never heard of, and yet it felt strangely familiar. The walls were covered in faded wallpaper, peeling at the edges, and the floorboards creaked beneath his feet, as though they too were protesting his presence. At the end of the hall, there was another door, this one even older than the others, its wood darkened with age, the knob worn smooth from years of use. The door didn't have a lock, but Michael knew, without a doubt, that it was just as dangerous as the one he had opened earlier. It was a door that should never have been touched, a door that had been hidden away for a reason. He approached it cautiously, his hand hovering over the knob. The air was thick with tension, and for a moment, Michael hesitated. Should he open it? Should he dare to see what was behind it? He had already uncovered enough, hadn't he? But something in him, something he couldn't explain, urged him forward. The house wanted him to open it. The house needed him to open it. Slowly, carefully, Michael turned the knob and pushed the door open. Inside was a small room, barely larger than a closet. It was empty,
save for a single wooden chair in the center of the room. Its backrest tall and imposing, the chair looked out of place, as though it had been placed there deliberately, to face the door. The walls were bare, the air stagnant, and the only light in the room came from the faint glow of the hallway behind him. Michael stepped inside, his heart racing as the door creaked closed behind him, shutting him in. He walked toward the chair, his feet dragging across the floor, as if the very air itself was trying to hold him back. And then he saw it. On the floor beneath the chair was a small box. It was old, its edges worn smooth from years of handling. The box was carved with intricate patterns, symbols he didn't recognize, but that felt familiar all the same. It was the same feeling he had gotten from the house itself. The feeling that everything here was connected, that it was all part of something bigger. Without thinking, Michael reached for the box. His fingers brushed against the lid, and the moment he touched it, he felt a jolt of electricity course through his body. The room seemed to shift around him, the walls closing in, the air growing thick with the scent of something foul. The house was eyes, and it had been waiting for him. He lifted the lid, and inside, there was nothing but dust. But beneath the dust, there was something else, something that made Michael's blood run cold. A single yellowed piece of paper folded neatly inside the box. The paper was old, so old that it looked like it might crumble to dust at any moment. He carefully unfolded it, his hands shaking as he read the words that were written in a spidery script, words that made his stomach turn. The curse is not just in the house, it is in you, Michael. You are the key, and you will never escape. Michael stood frozen, the yellowed piece of paper trembling in his hands. The words, cold and final, seemed to sear themselves into his brain, repeating over and over, "You are the key, and you will never escape." The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just about his family, or the house. It was about him, about his own bloodline and whatever curse had haunted the Turners for generations. He staggered back from the chair, almost tripping over his own feet, as if the very room itself was trying to swallow him whole. The air was thick now, suffocating, and the faint echo of whispers seemed to swirl around him, growing louder with every passing second. He could hear the voices of his ancestors, trapped here, pleading for release, or perhaps warning him of the fate he had inherited. The words on the paper seemed to mock him, reminding him of his helplessness. "You will never escape." It was as if the house had already claimed him, had already marked him as its next victim. The coldness of the room, the stillness in the air, it was all so suffocating, so final. Michael tried to shake off the feeling, trying to reason with himself. There had to be some explanation, some way to break the curse, to find a way out of this nightmare. He had to be able to find answers, to uncover the truth, to free himself from whatever dark power had gripped his family for so long. But deep down, he knew it wasn't that simple. The truth was hiding in plain sight, woven into the walls of the Turner house, sealed behind locked doors and hidden rooms. And as much as he wanted to fight it, he couldn't deny the truth that was becoming more apparent with every passing moment. The Turner family wasn't just cursed. They were bound to this house, to this land for eternity. The house had claimed them, and now it was waiting for its next victim. Michael was the next in line, and there was no escape. He looked down at the paper again, his eyes scanning the lines that seemed to blur and shift before him. The words seemed to be alive, alive in a way that was impossible to explain. His heart pounded in his chest, a rhythmic thump that echoed in his ears, as though the house itself were beating in time with his own pulse. For a moment, Michael considered running. He could leave this place, never look back, and try to start over somewhere far away. But something deep inside him told him that would never work. No matter where he went, the house would follow, the curse would follow. It wasn't just about the Turner estate. It was about him, his bloodline, his very soul. He looked around the room, the familiar walls now feeling strange and foreign, as if they were closing in on him. The door behind him felt like a trap, a way out that would only lead him deeper into the house's grasp. The windows, the ones that had once offered him A glimpse of the outside world now felt like barriers keeping him locked in this nightmare. Suddenly he heard it. The sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, echoing down the hallway. The air shifted again, colder, heavier, as if the house itself were breathing. Michael's breath caught in his throat, his heart skipping a beat. The footsteps were growing closer and he couldn't help but turn toward them, even though he knew he should. A figure appeared in the doorway, silhouetted against the dim light of the hallway. Michael's breath caught as he recognized the figure standing there. His great-grandfather, Samuel Turner, the man whose name was whispered in fear throughout the family, the man who had vanished without a trace decades ago. But now here he was standing in the doorway, his eyes empty and hollow, his face twisted in a way that made Michael's blood run cold. He was still wearing the same clothes Michael had seen in the old family portraits, but now they were torn and tattered, stained with something that looked like blood. Samuel's voice was a low, raspy whisper as he spoke, his words barely audible. "You shouldn't have come back," he said. "You don't understand. It was never meant to be broken." Michael's throat went dry, his legs shaking beneath him, as he took a step backward. "Grandfather, what happened to you?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Samuel's eyes flickered, his gaze shifting in a way that made Michael feel as though the very room was closing in on him. "It's all too late," he rasped, his voice growing weaker. "You should have stayed away, Michael. The house doesn't forget. The house never forget." Michael's chest tightened, the words sinking into him like a weight. The house that had claimed his family, that had twisted their fates, that had slowly over generations bled them dry. It was still here in the walls, in the very air they breathed, and now it was trying to claim him as well. Suddenly, Samuel's figure seemed to waver, like a shadow being blown by the wind, his form flickering in and out of focus. Michael reached out instinctively, but the figure vanished before his eyes, leaving behind only the faintest trace of cold air. He was alone again, but the presence of his great-grandfather lingered in the room, and so did the weight of the curse that had haunted his family for so long. Michael's hands trembled as he looked down at the paper once more. The words were clearer now, etched into his mind. "The curse is not just in the house. It is in you, Michael." It was true. He had never been meant to escape. The room felt smaller now, the walls pressing in on him, and the door seemed to be 1,000 miles away. But Michael knew there was no escape from this. The house had claimed him, just as it had claimed his ancestors. And in that moment, he realized the truth. There was no breaking the curse. There was only acceptance, and he would be its next victim. The weight of the truth began to settle heavily on Michael's shoulders, like an invisible chain wrapping tighter with every breath. The house had chosen him. There was no escaping the fact now. He could feel the walls closing in, the air thick with a presence that had never left. And yet, as much as he wanted to fight, as much as he wanted to scream at the house to release its grip, he knew there was nothing he could do. As his thoughts raced, he caught sight of something out of the corner of his eye, a glimmer in the darkness. It was faint at first, almost imperceptible, but it grew brighter the longer he stared. It wasn't a reflection, not the way light would bounce off a surface. This light seemed to come from within, a pale, ethereal glow emanating from the floorboards. Michael's heart raced as he took cautious steps forward. The glow flickered in time with his heartbeat, pulsing almost rhythmically as though it were calling to him. The more he watched, the more the feeling of dread grew. But he couldn't look away. He had to know what was hidden beneath the surface. He knelt beside the glowing floorboards and pressed his ear against them. A strange hum reverberated beneath the wood, a sound so low, it could only be felt rather than heard. His fingers brushed over the floor, following the pulse of the light, until they hit a soft spot. Without thinking, he pried the boards loose, the wood groaning in protest. The glow intensified, and as the boards finally gave way, Michael's breath caught in his throat. Beneath the floor was a trapdoor, a small, square opening that led into the dark abyss of the Turner house's secret. He had always known there were mysteries hidden beneath the house, but nothing had prepared him for this. His pulse quickened as he grabbed the rusty handle of the trapdoor and yanked it open. The air that rushed from beneath it was cold, far colder than anything he had ever felt before. It felt ancient, as though the house had been holding its breath for years, waiting for someone to uncover its secrets. The staircase beneath the trapdoor was narrow and winding, descending into a darkness that seemed almost alive. Michael hesitated. He could feel something pulling him down, beckoning him into the depths of the house. It was as though the house itself was calling his name, urging him to discover what had been hidden for so long. He stepped cautiously onto the first stair, the wood creaking under his weight, and then another, and another. With every step, the darkness seemed to grow deeper, and the air grew colder. The whispering began again, the soft murmur of voices in the distance. But this time it wasn't just the house. It was something else, something older, more malevolent. The stairs spiraled downward, and Michael's heart thudded in his chest. He couldn't explain it, but he could feel that this was where everything would change. Whatever was down there, whatever had been hidden beneath the house, had been waiting for him. He reached the bottom of the stairs and stepped into a vast, underground chamber. The walls were made of stone, their surfaces slick with dampness, and the air smelled of earth and mild. The faint light that had led him here seemed to dim as he ventured deeper into the chamber, but it wasn't the light that concerned him now. It was the presence. Something was watching him from the shadow. The walls of the chamber were covered in strange symbols, carved into the stone with what seemed like a desperate hand. Michael traced the symbols with his fingers, his touch sending an electric chill through his body. They were ancient, far older than anything he had seen before. They seemed to pulse with energy, as though they were alive. As he moved deeper into the room, he saw it, an altar, old and weathered, at the far end of the chamber. The stone was slick with a dark reddish substance, and there were objects on the altar, ritualistic items, symbols of power. But it was the object at the center of the altar that caught his eye. It was a book, thick and bound in what appeared to be aged leather, its pages yellowed with age. The book was open, as though someone had been reading it just moments before. But what drew Michael's attention was the text on the pages, written in a language he couldn't understand, yet somehow he could feel it. It resonated within him, as though the words were speaking directly to his soul. Michael couldn't stop himself. He moved toward the altar, his hand reaching out for the book. His fingers brushed the pages, and in that instant, the room seemed to shift. The walls groaned as though they were alive, and the air thickened, pressing against him from all sides.
The whispering grew louder, until it was deafening, a chorus of voices screaming in terror and rage. He jerked his hand back, his heart racing as he took a step away from the altar. The room seemed to close in on him, the shadows lengthening, reaching for him with unseen hands. He could feel the weight of the curse, the darkness that had been buried here for generations, trying to claim him as its next victim. In that moment, Michael understood. The house, the Turner family, it was all tied together, bound by the bloodline, by the secrets that had been hidden beneath the surface for so long. The curse wasn't just in the house, it was in him, in his very bones, and there was no escape. The house had claimed him, just as it had claimed his ancestors. And now, as the whispers reached a deafening crescendo, Michael knew that he was the one who would join them. He was the next sacrifice, the next soul to be consumed by the house's insatiable hunger. The Turner house stood tall, nestled in the corner of a quiet neighborhood where the air was thick with the scent of old wood and moss. The mansion was a relic of another time, its grandiosity hidden beneath layers of neglect. The windows were darkened, the ivy creeping up its stone walls like a veil that had long since been forgotten. But it wasn't the mansion's eerie presence that caused the town to whisper. It was the locked door. This door had been the subject of gossip. For as long as anyone could remember, no one knew what was behind it. No one dared to speak of it. For decades, the inhabitants of the house had kept it locked tight, and whenever someone ventured too close, the air grew thick with a tension that could choke the bravest soul. It was said to be the secret of the Turner family, a curse that had been passed down from generation to generation. And though rumors swirled like smoke, no one had ever dared to go near it. Until now, when Michael Turner, the last living heir of the house, returned after years of exile, the mysteries of the mansion seemed to come alive. His return had been unexpected. The town had thought him dead. After all, it had been over a decade since he disappeared without a trace, and the house had remained silent ever since. But now, here he was, standing before the mansion's grand entrance, the weight of the past pressing down on him. The door creaked open with an unsettling groan, and as Michael stepped inside, the house seemed to sigh, as though it was awakening from a deep slumber. He had returned to settle his family's affairs, but he also had unfinished business. There was something inside that house, a secret hidden away in the locked room, that he needed to face. It wasn't just the house that had been abandoned. The memories had been locked away too. The townspeople had forgotten about the tragedy that had befallen the Turner family. Or perhaps they had chosen to forget. For the Turners, it had always been a house of grief, and that locked door was the key to a past they had tried to bury. Michael's first step inside was hesitant. His footfalls echoed down the hollow hallways, the once vibrant walls now cracked and peeling. The air smelled of dust and decay, a stark contrast to the fresh scent of the countryside outside. As he made his way deeper into the house, a cold chill swept over him. It wasn't just the cold air, it was something else, something more unsettling. It was as though the house itself had been waiting for him to return, waiting for him to unlock the truth. The locked door stood at the end of a long, narrow corridor, its iron hinges rusted, and the keyhole long forgotten. The door was part of the house, part of the Turner family's legacy, and it was something that had to be dealt with. Michael knew this. He had always known. The truth had haunted him in his dreams, whispered to him in the darkest corners of his mind. He had thought that by leaving, by disappearing, he could escape the memories. But now, standing before the locked door, he realized that there was no escape. The past would always find a way back. He reached for the key which had been passed down through the generations. It was a simple thing, worn and tarnished by time, but it held more power than anything else in the world. Michael inserted the key into the lock, and with a twist, the door creaked open. The room behind the door was pitch black. Michael could feel the weight of the darkness pressing in on him, suffocating him. It was the kind of darkness that made you feel small, insignificant, like a child afraid of what lurked under the bed. But he was no longer a child, and he wasn't afraid. At least he told himself that. He stepped inside, the floorboards creaking under his weight. The air inside was thick, stagnant, as if it had been sealed away for years. The room seemed to swallow him whole, the shadows curling around him like fingers, pulling him deeper into its grip. It wasn't until he found the light switch that he realized how truly old the room was. The walls were lined with old bookshelves, covered in dust. The furniture, though shrouded in sheets, was expensive. It was clear that this had once been the most important room in the house. But it wasn't the room itself that sent a shiver down his spine. It was the smell. The air was tainted with a sickly sweet odor, the kind of smell you associate with something dead. And as Michael's eyes scanned the room, they landed on a small table in the center. It was covered in a white cloth, and atop it lay a box. The box was small, wooden, and intricately carved. It seemed out of place in this room, as though it didn't belong. But Michael knew it did. He had seen that box before in his dreams, in the nightmares that had haunted him for years. It had always been a part of the house, a part of the Turner family's history. With trembling hands, he approached the box. His fingers hovered over it, unsure if he was ready to open it.
unsure if he could handle what was inside, but he had come this far. He had returned to the house, to the family, to the secret that had been hidden for so long. He had to know the truth. He lifted the lid. Inside the box was a letter, yellowed with age. The handwriting was faded, but still legible. As Michael read the words, his heart sank, and a cold sweat broke out on his brow. This was the moment he had been dreading. The moment the truth would be revealed. The letter told of a curse, a dark force that had been passed down through the generation. It spoke of a secret pact, made long ago, a pact that had bound the Turner family to a fate they could never escape. It was a warning, a final plea for someone to stop what had been set in motion. The letter ended with a single sentence, written in bold, scrawling letters. "It is too late. The curse is already upon you." Michael's hands trembled as he held the letter, his eyes scanning the words over and over, trying to make sense of them. The cold weight of what he had just uncovered settled heavily in his chest. The words on the paper were like a death sentence, sealing the fate of the Turner family, and by extension, his own fate. He had come back to find answers, but the answer he found was one that no one could ever be prepared for. "It is too late. The curse is already upon you." The message was simple, yet its implications were enough to shatter Michael's sense of reality. He had spent years avoiding the house, running from the truth that had haunted him. Now, with the letter in his hands, it felt like everything he had tried to escape was coming for him. It was impossible to ignore the weight of his family's history. And yet here it was, demanding attention. The curse had always been a part of the Turner legacy, passed down through the generations. But it wasn't until this moment that Michael understood the true extent of its power. Michael couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was watching him. The house, though silent, seemed to have a life of its own. The walls closed in around him, and the shadows in the corners seemed to stretch, reaching out like arms. He wasn't alone in this room. The air was thick with an unnatural presence, a presence that had always been there, lurking just beneath the surface, waiting for him to return. He looked around the room, his eyes darting from the box to the shelves lining the walls. The room, despite its dust and disuse, seemed oddly preserved, as though it had been frozen in time. There were old family portraits hanging crookedly on the walls, their faded faces staring down at him, their eyes hollow and mournful. Each one seemed to tell a different story, a different tragedy, a different loss that had plagued the Turner family for generations. Michael felt the weight of their gaze upon him, the same way he had felt it as a child. The Turner family had always been cursed, bound to a fate that none of them had ever been able to escape. The house, the portraits, the locked door, everything was a part of the story. A story that Michael had spent so long trying to forget. But it wasn't just a story. It was his reality now, and it was too late to escape it. He carefully folded the letter and placed it back in the box, his mind racing with questions. What had his ancestors done to deserve such a fate? What was the curse that had haunted the Turner family for so long? And why had they left this message for him? There had to be more to this. There had to be an answer. His heart pounded in his chest as he turned to leave the room. But something stopped him. The door, which had creaked open when he entered, slammed shut with a force that sent a jolt of fear through his body. The air grew colder, and the shadows in the room seemed to grow darker, as though they were closing in on him. He reached for the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. It was as though the house itself had locked him in, refusing to let him leave. The room seemed to close in on him, the walls pressing in tighter and tighter. Michael's breathing quickened, and panic began to rise in his chest. He tried to open the door again, but his hands were shaking too much. He couldn't think straight. The air was thick with something dark, something that felt like it was alive, and Michael could feel it closing in on him. Suddenly, a voice echoed through the room. It was low, soft, and almost whispering. but it was unmistakable. Michael froze, his blood running cold. "You shouldn't have opened it," the voice came from behind him. But when he turned, there was no one there. The room was empty, the shadows stretching longer as though something unseen was moving around him. His heart raced in his chest as he slowly turned back to face the door. "You can't escape what's already been set in motion." The voice was louder now, more insistent, and Michael could feel it vibrating through his body. He tried to scream, to shout for help, but no sound came out. It was as if the house had swallowed every sound, leaving only silence behind. He was trapped in that silence, with nothing but the voice echoing in his mind. His eyes darted around the room, searching for the source of the voice, but there was no one to be found. The family portraits on the wall seemed to have changed. The eyes of the figures now followed him, their gazes dark and accusing. The room felt smaller, more claustrophobic, as though it was closing in on him from all sides. He tried the door again, but it was still locked tight. The room was spinning, the walls pressing in on him. As the air grew heavier, Michael's chest felt tight, and he struggled to breathe. Panic surged within him, his mind racing with thoughts of escape, of running, of getting out of this place. But he knew, deep down, that there was no escaping. The curse had already been set in motion. It was too late. "You're one of us now," the voice whispered again, and Michael felt the weight of those words settle in his chest, like a stone. He wasn't just the heir to the Turner family, he was part of the curse. A curse that had been passed down through generations. A curse that would never let him go. With shaking hands, Michael reached for the key that had been passed down through the Turner family. He had always known that one day, he would have to unlock the truth. But he had never imagined it would come to this. The truth was darker, more terrifying than anything he could have ever imagined. The key turned in his hands, the sound of the lock snapping open echoing through the room like a death knell. The door creaked open, and the cold air rushed in, carrying with it a wave of darkness that seemed to swallow the light. Michael stepped out into the hallway, the weight of the curse heavy on his shoulders. But as he walked away from the locked room, he knew that he hadn't truly escaped. The curse was still with him, lurking in the shadows, waiting for him to return. And as he looked back at the door, he could hear the faintest whisper, "You'll be back." Michael's feet carried him down the long hallway, the eerie silence of the house pressing in on him from all sides. He tried to ignore the cold chill running up his spine, but the feeling of being watched was unavoidable. The house, despite its emptiness, seemed to be alive in a way that was hard to explain. It was as if the walls themselves held memories. Memories of things that had happened long before Michael had arrived, and things that would continue to happen long after he left. The flickering lights above him only added to the unsettling atmosphere. Each bulb seemed to burn brighter for a moment, then dim for a second, as though it too was struggling to hold on to some sense of normalcy. But normalcy had long since abandoned this place. The letter, the voice, the locked door, they all spoke of something darker than any of Michael's ancestors could have imagined. As he reached the staircase, he paused for a moment, his hand gripping the railing tight. The stairs creaked beneath his feet, groaning as if the house itself were in pain. The weight of his family's legacy seemed to press down on him with every step he took, and he wondered if he had truly understood what it meant to inherit this cursed place. At the bottom of the stairs, the front door was wide open, an invitation to escape. But Michael knew it wouldn't be that easy. There was no running from this, no fleeing to some distant city where the curse wouldn't follow. It had already rooted itself too deep into his blood, and now it had a hold of him that no distance could sever. He had come here to find answers, but in doing so, he had sealed his fate. The Turner family bloodline was marked, and there was no escaping it. As Michael walked toward the front door, he glanced out the large window, half expecting to see the familiar faces of his ancestors watching him from across the lawn. Their portraits had haunted him throughout his childhood, their eyes following him wherever he went, their disapproving glares serving as a constant reminder that there was no escaping what was expected of him. But now, as he stared out into the night, there was only darkness. The world outside felt distant, alien. As though it were no longer connected to the house, he could feel the pull of something. Something that resided in the walls, in the very foundations of the Turner estate. It was as though the house itself was calling him back. Michael. The whisper came again, barely audible, but unmistakable. The voice he had heard earlier. The voice that seemed to seep from the very air itself, now called out to him. It was closer this time, as though it was standing just behind him, waiting for him to turn around. Michael froze, his heart pounding in his chest. He hadn't imagined it. He knew he hadn't. The voice was real, and it had come from the house itself. He could feel it. The pressure of its presence surrounding him. It was the same presence that had haunted his family for generations. The same force that had driven them to madness, to destruction.